idea what I'm going to draw. Let's say Wonder Woman. So one thing, especially with relatively simplified forms like this, is you can make a big difference how high or low you put this sort of bend in the cheek. If you have it down too low, well, low and high are relative, but if you have it lower down, it makes a face that looks chubbier or might look more young for a kid. If you have it much higher up, it can look much more chiseled, but also harsher for an older character. So usually when I draw a character like, say, Wonder Woman, especially when I do sort of that Wednesday Comics sort of teen version of her, I keep it about 2/3 from the bottom, and then sort of round and soften it. And some of that rounding and softening is really just a process of trial and error over the years. But if you're aware of that, it can help you if you feel like character's looking too young or too old or too harsh. For the eyes, again, with simple shapes, and I did a video on this, I don't know if I'm going to post it. Simple shapes, assuming that the top and bottom eyelid are equally curved, which doesn't have to be the case, then if a character is looking down, the bottom one will be more curved and the top one will be less. So, as in this case, one thing I always do is I always redesign characters and like paraphernalia, like tiaras and so on. Editors just love that when you take a famous established character that always should look a certain way and you just reimagine them how you want them with no regard for anyone else's feelings. But no one successfully stopped me yet, so what are you going to do? I'm going to make something that looks more angular. A lot of times I do stuff like this where I just come up with a face and build around it. I would definitely not recommend that, because then you're left figuring out how the heck you're going to make it work. And sometimes you can do that and make it work, yay, but a lot of times you can't. Boo. Before, again on a video which I haven't posted and may not, I talked about planing. So right here, I don't always do this, and even when I do, I don't always draw it, but sometimes I'll think, in this case, for example, with her torso, where to figure out where the hip break is, especially at an angle like this, I'm thinking, the chest wraps around here, that's the neck, the elbows, the shoulders, and then thinking almost if this was a side view, like that. Even though it won't have the harsh plane in the end, that can help me think, oh, the hip bones go there relatively, and the bum is like that. So I don't literally draw that every single time, but I definitely put that kind of thought into things. least try to. People ask all sorts of questions about my lines being graceful. Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. This is definitely leaning towards one of those not times, I think. But, you know, it is what it is. Of course, part of something like this is creating contrast with the different body parts, even when it's truncated or when you're looking at something like at an angle, such as this whole bum leg area. You can see this part is a short curve with a longer line, while this is one long sweeping curve. Although I'm not sure this part particularly works. I think it should be more foreshortened, perhaps. Like so. It's a shame because part of the knee gets hidden by the arm here, and the knee is really handy for helping to establish the parts of the body, but it is what it is. I'm not sure if that actually makes any sense at all. I think it should be actually... Anyone who's seen my doodles will also notice that a lot of times I'll have like extra limbs drawn on. Like a character will have 3 arms or so on, and that's because I'm trying out multiple versions. Sometimes I erase versions I don't like, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I forget because I'm an idiot. Sometimes it also is just a deliberate decision because you know, I like the multiple ones. I kind of want to get an idea of what I'm doing with them. So unfortunately, I really love how those legs turned out, but how they turned out on their own is not the same thing as how they would work with the rest of the drawing, and they don't work with the rest of the drawing, so I'm going to have to rethink them. Call it big boy here. I also make all sorts of sound effects when I'm drawing, because it's just like when I was a kid and I would draw to just make myself laugh and come up with whatever crazy stuff I could. And one of the hardest things for me, it's gotten a little better as I've gotten older, but and also it's gotten better because I can scan things. So if I like something but I'm not sure where it's going, I can scan it, and then if I have to change it, I can. But one of the hardest things for me for the longest time was sort of with that leg example before, actually. I would feel really good with something I had done, and then I would realize, unfortunately, that it didn't really fit in with the rest of the picture, and then I would be afraid to do anything to it, because, you know, it was such a beautiful thing on its own. You'll also notice with that leg, I mean, I fixed it up a little bit, but again, people will say that I have really elegant sweeping lines or something like that, and sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but that's the sort of thing where, especially with drawings, I don't even start worrying about that. When it comes to the final gloss of a picture, I might, but usually that's not so important to me. Okay. And I mentioned this in a previous post, but the curves that can be provided by material like belts and bracelets and so on can be really helpful for defining curvature of shapes and so on. Work out our chest. So with characters, in this case, for example, Wonder Woman, she's supposed to be the most beautiful character in the world, and so that's a big part of drawing her. Having said that, there's a big difference between being beautiful and looking like an inflated balloon doll. So I try and always balance the elements of a character. In her case, her beauty is also enhanced or tempered, or however you want to put it, by her athleticism, and her joy de vivre, her excitement of being alive, and so on. So I always try and make sure that those are a big part of any drawing I do for her. So the point of that is I try and keep all of her features, or any character like her, kind of working together to make that point as an interesting character, and not just as a pretty face or a pretty body. Let's see. Also, she's got to move around, and that's not always so easy with too much going on physically. Okay, let's see. So she's got, and again, that's tricky for her chest plate because the way it's designed sometimes. It's really low cut, which makes it hard to, I would imagine would make it hard for her to really get much done in it. Although, of course, I should also emphasize that I am certainly not someone who worries about realism in the conventional sense with the characters that I draw. I figure that if you're talking about, an immortal Amazon who may or may not be made from the clay or beach sand or whatever, then there's a certain it's safe to say there's a certain amount of realism that you're just not getting with the story, and you just need to accept that and move on. Normally I'd probably take a little more time with the lasso and really try and get a nice, interesting flow to it, but what can I say? I'm a bad person. Angles for things like this can always be tricky, and I'm not sure I actually got it right, but wow, I picked the worst angle for someone who's only moderately conscious right now. Let's see. Actually, when I was doing the Wonder Woman children's books, I actually gave her little shoulder strap things. And I think I'm going to continue with something along those lines now. Because, as always, this is my drawing, and I just don't care. And I always like draw things a little bashed up. Maybe that's because I am always bumping into stuff and smashing things and getting cuts and scrapes. So this is relatively basic compared to some of my other Wonder Woman stuff. I'm sure be disappointing possibly for some people. there aren't a lot of, you know, fancy curves or whatever. And that's it. Adios. Bye.